Oh, amazing.
Yes.
Z.
Thank you.
Zara.
It's my friends who own this very beautiful consignment store.
Thank you all so much for coming out.
Yes.
Is there a trash can over here?
We appreciate you filling the space.
I just go.
My name is Amali, and I'm the events director at Books of Magic, which you don't know. Thank you. Lovely but independent bookstore just a few blocks away.
Should I walk down the aisle?
So, we are so excited to have Haley Mlotek and Jazmine Hughes with us tonight to celebrate the launch of Haley's debut book, No Fault.
Just joking. Should
Before we get officially started, I just have a few logistics to point out for how tonight's event is going to go. First, I want to give a huge thank you to the Invisible Dog for letting us use their space tonight. They, as you can see, have an incredible calendar of exhibitions and performances, so I highly recommend checking out what they have going on. There are also some restrooms through either that white door or blue door if you need at any point tonight. We will be doing a hand-raised audience Q&A towards the end of the discussion, during which Jazmine will be running around a wireless mic to all of you, so please start thinking of questions to ask and hold on to them. After the talk, Haley will be around to sign and personalize your books at the table where you checked in. We'll let you know where and when to start lining up for that. And finally, if you're joining us virtually on the YouTube live stream, we would love to encourage you to buy a copy of No Fault online using the link in the live stream description. Okay, now let's get into this. In No Fault, Haley puts divorce at the center of the blinding spotlight, and not just her own, her grandmother's, her mother's, the entire history of the practice and process as a whole, and in doing so, unearths the heartbreak, the catharsis, the fragmentation and the resolution, and all the very messy bits that are at the heart of dissolving a marriage. There's so much to discuss, so let me introduce you all to tonight's wonderful writers. Haley Mlotek is a writer, editor, and organizer. Her work has appeared in numerous publications, including the New York Times Magazine, the New Yorker, The Nation, Book Forum, and the Paris Review. She is a founding member of the Freelance Solidarity Project in the National Writers Union, teaches in the English and Journalism departments at Concordia University, and is the editorial lead at Field. Previously, Haley was the deputy editor of Essence, the style editor of MTV News, the editor of The Hairpin, and the publisher of Worn Fashion Journal. And as I mentioned earlier, Jazmine Hughes joins Haley in conversation tonight. Jazmine is a writer based between New York City and Mexico. Her work has appeared in The New Yorker, New York Magazine, and the New York Times. She is the recipient of the National Magazine Award. That's all for me. Please join me in giving Haley and Jazmine a very welcome.
Oh my God. Hi, everyone. Welcome to the best day of my life, which is Haley's book party. 3 things have changed my life over the past 33 years. 1, marijuana. 2, cunnilingus. And 3, Haley Mlotek. I've known Haley since she hired me at The Hairpin. May it rest in peace. For those of you who don't know, The Hairpin was a website from when the internet used to be fun and good. And there's so many people here that we know from The Hairpin, through The Hairpin. And it does feel like, let's pretend for the next 30 minutes that it's 2014 and we're all on Twitter and we're having a great time. So Haley, congratulations on having this week's viral cut essay.
Thank you so much. Thank you, and I'm sorry.
No, I want to start with, actually, there's so many starts to this book, but the one I know best is Letter of Recommendation, Divorce.
Yes.
Can you walk us through what that story was and how that led to the book?
Yes. So in my phase of being newly separated and trying to put all my energy into something else, I was taking a lot of notes that I didn't really think were about divorce at all, but of course everything was. And so at one point, I think it was I want to say it was the conscious uncoupling thing, or maybe something else just like blew up on Twitter when Twitter still existed.
And for those of us who are Gen Zs in the room, what's conscious uncoupling?
Okay, now I feel like I'm gonna get wrong. That was Gwyneth Paltrow, wasn't it?
Chris Martin.
Gwyneth Paltrow and Chris Martin, instead of divorcing, they said they were doing a conscious uncoupling.
Opening a pathway for lesbians everywhere.
Yes, we're so grateful to them. And so I pitched to my then editor at the Times Magazine a letter of recommendation divorce, because it occurred to me this was a great moment to make a fun joke about my divorce thoughts. And he very wisely said that I couldn't do that because I would be destroyed on the internet. And I said, that's why you should let me do that. But you know, we went our separate ways, right? And I was telling this story to my brilliant friend, Dana Tortorici, and she said very wisely, well, why not just write the essay for me? And so I did, taking it seriously probably for the first time, and it was when I sent her the draft that she said, this is a book, you know, like even if we gave you 10,000 words, it's not enough for what you have to say, and she was right, the way she always is.
Shout out to Tortorici, the Italian stallion. So one thing I also remember from that time was I also was an editor of the letter of recommendation column at the New York Times Magazine before they fired me, Free Palestine. But
yes, more applause for that.
No, this is
one more round of applause.
This is Haley's day. But I also received a submission from someone else, letter of recommendation divorce, and I thought it was so funny. So I connected the two of you together,
yes.
And we had a little bit something called Divorce Club.
Yes.
Where we all went to a bar and we talked about divorce. And one thing that's really evident in the book is the way that identifying as a divorcee and having like undergone this experience has been like kind of a bonding strip for you to various women in your life. And I wonder if you could talk about those relationships.
Oh, absolutely. Well, again, the joke version of that I was just talking about earlier today is that it has put me in a situation where people frequently turn to me and say, like, should I break up with him? Which I love to be consulted, but you know, if you've read the book, you know I don't know, or I wouldn't tell you one way or another what to do. But as I write in the book, towards the end of my marriage, and then of course immediately after my separation, I was so lucky to have all these new friendships with people developing from moving cities, from moving between jobs, and being divorced was sort of like my fun fact, you know, like because all these people were meeting me for the first time. And so I do think perhaps it lent itself well to much more open conversations. I remember like in that time, there was such a heightened emotional tenor to everything that was sort of easy to slip into really deep conversations, not just about, you know, myself or like the specifics of my life, but the big general ideas about what it means to be in love or to be heartbroken. And so that's, I think, the like romance with my friendships that I wanted to come through in the book.
Mm-hmm. There's also, so I wish that I had written down the page number, but there's the quote from the book that you ended up writing about for the letter of recommendation.
Yes.
And the quote is something along the lines of like, of course, a crisis in my life is just
nothing but gossip for yours.
Yes.
Yeah, devastating.
And as someone who's known you for as long as I have, you love gossip. Haley is the queen. Haley is the queen of the, can I just be mean for a second text message? When I get that from Haley, I know I'm getting something really good.
And it's never mean is the funny thing. Like what I consider mean is just like
it's
not
very
up to your
Canadian of
standards.
her.
Yeah.
But I wonder what it felt like as a huge gossiper yourself to know that you were this focal point of gossip, both as sort of this like salacious tale, but also another thing Haley and I have in common is that we're both eldest sisters. And so in some ways, I'm sure it felt uncomfortable and sort of like there was this spotlight, but in other ways you were like a almost a cautionary tale in the way that big sisters often are. I went through this so that you don't have to.
And that group of friends that I was talking about that I got to know so well after the separation, we often joked about being very aware that there were big sisters and there were little sisters in that group. And it didn't always correspond to birth order necessarily. It's really more of a feeling. But it is true, and I think that kind of added to the like asking me if they should also get divorced type of feeling. Like, but I do love gossip. I think there's been a lot more writing recently, but there's also a huge archive of people who have really made the argument for taking gossip very seriously as a political force, or to, you know, point out that a lot of the ways it's minimized is very misogynistic. But also it's just fun, and it is a way to like really like broker trust, you know, like I
If
would
anyone
not
has
send,
any gossip, Haley
Yeah.
and I will be available after the talk.
Oh yeah, that's gonna be the last 20 minutes. I'm just gonna list all the secrets that I've been keeping for the last 38 years.
I also wonder. It's not just, I want to go back to you talking about divorce as a fun fact. It's not just the matter that you got divorced. It's all the details around it. So for those of us who don't know, can you tell us a little bit about like what that relationship was?
Oh, yes. I mean, definitely no details. But like the important fact is what Jazmine's alluding to, is that my ex-husband and I met when we were 16, and we were together for 12 years. We've been living together for 5, and then we got married and separated pretty much exactly a year later. And so of course, that's the kind of chronological timeline that makes people ask, was it marriage that really did it for you? Like, was that what actually ended the relationship? And of course the answer is, I don't know. But it's quite different from other people. And that meant that I was separated when I was 29. So I was having what I like to call the divorce euphoria, you know, like a second adolescence of just feeling very alive and excited and depressed and horrified all the time. Right at the moment that most of my friends were getting married. So that really added to the feeling of being outside of this world at a very particular moment that I think is translated into the like more observational aspect of the book, where I'm just kind of just looking around and seeing what's going on.
I remember the summer you got divorced. You were so fun. Haley was living in Williamsburg. All you ate was candy, and all we did was get our nails done.
Yeah,
right?
That sounds about right. Yeah.
But it's interesting that you call it the second adolescence. I feel like many of us, regardless of how old we are, when we have a huge sort of life change, whether it's getting divorced, getting married, coming out as a homosexual, you like find yourself back in sort of your teenage times. And so my point is like, it's not just the fact that you got divorced, but you got divorced so young. And I wonder if you felt young at that time, and do you feel young now?
I feel 10,000 years old, which is how I felt then and how I feel now. And I make that joke in the book, so if you laughed, you'll like this. But yeah, it absolutely made me feel both at the same time, where I felt like such like Bambi, not sure how to stand up on his legs type of baby, and then also just like an old wise hag who, you know, you can see the wisdom in the lines on her face, because it does take on this feeling of having lived so much, because even in a short span of time, I guess it has that quality of grief as well, where things are so underwater and they move so slowly, which just adds to the sense that like a day doesn't pass for you the same way it does when you're not in that state.
Oh man, what were those early days like for you? After signing the papers and, you know, dividing up the shares of the Picasso, you went home from the divorce lawyer's office, and then what happened?
Well, I will admit, and this is a funny part about the fun fact that I was divorced, is that some of my friends were scandalized to find out that I'd been calling myself divorced when I was actually separated. So they thought it was like, like stolen valor, I guess. So I didn't get legally divorced for several years after being separated, or like, not a long time, but enough time that I had moved out of the apartment that we once lived in. I was living with roommates. I had gotten a new job. I had been fired from that job. Like, things had changed. And so there was a sense of, not like anti-climax necessarily, but coming home from it, I remember, like texting some people and being like, shouldn't I feel something else besides just this kind of dull sadness? But the dull sadness is, I think, the remnant of the more extreme fog that came from when we actually did split up. And that's another thing I really wanted to stress in the book. Certainly not, first of all, to like put any supremacy on marriage necessarily, because any type of relationship can have this sort of intense breakup. It's just more about the status or the category. But also with divorce, it's not necessarily the most important fact of your relationship. It's just what the government knows about the facts of your relationship. So that, I think, added to the sense where it's like, oh, right, now New York State knows that I'm divorced, but I've known for a minute.
Yeah. Okay, let's quickly talk about, can you talk a little bit about the fact of no-fault divorce, and then, unfortunately, J.D. Vance's thoughts on it?
Ugh.
We gotta know. We all have to know this. I'm sorry, eat your vegetables. Go.
Must we? Okay, so no-fault divorce is a term that is commonly applied to the legal practice of allowing people to dissolve a marriage without having to give a reason. And before it was introduced, you had to have at least one party be at fault, which one of my favorite facts in the book is that there were certain conditions you could present in courts that would allow a judge to automatically say, okay, you have a good reason for divorce. And so couples would sort of agree amongst themselves that one of them was going to take the fall for the other, so that they could get, like, they didn't really have a reason to divorce, but they would go and lie. And so, divorce rates stayed consistent, but perjury rates flourished in many places. But yeah, like, it really adds something, I think, to a lot of the stigma, or just like the general sense of shame that exists around divorce, that for so long, not only was it so inaccessible, it was practically unavailable to most people, but that it always came with the sense of, well, who messed up? Who did something wrong? And who broke this promise that you made very publicly? And so I do think, like, many other brilliant researchers and historians, that the introduction of no-fault divorce is one of those moments in law where the truly, like, radical nature of so much organizing work in culture is reflected back into the law. There's another researcher in this book that I cite, Jessie Bernard, who I love very much, who writes that by the time we know enough to question our social conventions, they've already lost their hold. And that's really what no-fault divorce was. By the time it was the type of thing that Ronald Reagan could sign into law on the first day of 1970, when he was the governor of California, it had long already been an informal practice. And now, some loser, I guess, like, he was like threatening over the summer, he was saying he wanted to take it away, which is very funny because there's actually no federal approach to divorce law in the United States. So, I mean, he can't, but, it's not great. And I think the thing to stress, if we must talk about this, is that, of course, fascist governments almost always go for divorce first when they are taking power. It is an excellent way to destabilize neighborhoods and to turn people against each other, but also that it is very, very connected to every, like more urgent emergency that is going on in this respectfully cursed country that you guys live in. Like, they're just
okay. You don't have to rub it in.
But it's just like, like when this administration creates such an assault on transgender people or undocumented people, it is about ripping apart families that are not legitimate to them. And so, yeah, so like locating the way politics appears in our most intimate relationships is a very necessary thing.
It's one of my favorite lines in the book, in which you were writing about Marie Pidiluc.
Oh, yeah.
Who procured one of the very first legal divorces in France in 1792. You write, the only substantial change to the facts of her daily life was what the government knew about it. And I mean, hence my question about J.D. Vance, because, you know, we've just talked about being a divorcee as sort of a social label, a social group. But also, if the government wants to get involved, that also, you know, divorcees could also be very well positioned to be tearing apart the nuclear family. And I want to ask a really scary question, but do you think in the ways that, you know, the internet knows that people who are pregnant before even they do you think the internet, the algorithms will one day know that people are getting divorced? And what might that mean for us?
This is a really scary question.
That's what you get for insulting the US of A. Only we can do that, okay?
Yeah, you're right. What was I thinking? I mean, this is a great concept for a horror movie if I want to move into genre.
Haley and I call dibs. Nobody write that.
Yeah, that's ours. Yeah, but I mean, probably. This is like a rude joke that I made that is not true. I don't believe this. But just, you know how sometimes people on Instagram will like post their significant other an extra amount right before they break up? Like that's definitely, yes, smart Zuckerberg is watching that being like, okay. But of course, like, you know, as we know, as we've known for far too long, there is no difference between our online life and our real life. There's definitely some differences to the way people interact with each other or how those interactions perhaps present themselves that are different from the way you are face to face. But yeah, in the same way, you can look at a beautiful friend's face and be like, oh no, something's not right. For sure. Yeah, I think the algorithm knows is my way of answering that.
I want to go back to you getting divorced, the reason why we're all here, and the sort of, thanks so much for doing that, by the way, and the emotional seasons that followed. Again, we just talked about immediately returning home after the separation, and then I just talked about your candy summer. Then, you know, one thing that really struck me in some reviews of your book, the Washington Post critic had these great turns of phrases, like Mlotek leaves her marriage in search of chaos, and another one was the disarray of desire. Did it feel messy to you at the time? I remember, again, speaking about the adolescence, you just felt like you were searching.
Yes.
But and I wonder what that felt for you, how that felt for you internally, and then what happened after that?
It definitely felt messy. It definitely felt very freeing in a way that I often felt guilty about because I don't want to give the impression that it was something that was constraining me that I needed to be released from. It was a very different experience than that, luckily. But yes, I remember having these moments of just like intense gratitude to be alone. And I think that lent itself to the big highs and the big lows, you know? Because then when you stop being grateful to be alone and you're actually sad about it, it's like, oh no, I did this to myself. But, like all of the best and worst things about life. And I remember thinking a lot about whether or not I was not just having a second adolescence, but maybe having the type of life that some of my friends had when they went to university, because I didn't go to university, and I was so jealous of my friends who did. And I would go visit them, and I would get a little like glimpse into their lives, and they were reckless in a way that I thought was so fun. And that was definitely those first years in New York. But then I would meet people who were maybe several decades older than I was at the time, and they would report the same feeling, which is like, there's a lot of ways to feel about that, but it did reassure me to remember that life has so many periods of renewal that it is not something that is necessarily tied to a specific age or era, that it's always possible to access you know, that really fun messiness at any age.
I remember in our divorce club meeting, when we arrived, Haley brought a friend, me, and the other woman brought a friend. And I think when they walked in, they sat down at the table, we went to Fulton Grand, and one of them said, "So whose fault was it?" Right?
Yeah.
And so, I mean, one of the loveliest things about your book and about you as a person is that there's no blame. You know, it's literally in the name of the title. And I wonder, firstly, I wonder if you can get in a little bit into how people talk to you about your divorce, how people are trying to needle around. We're friends with a lot of journalists. You're all here. And I know people have tried to get around that. And then I wonder how that felt when you were actually putting pen to paper.
Yeah, a very funny story that our beautiful friend Gia Tolentino, who I was very lucky to be interviewed by, and I was joking that we should call it her revenge because she's always asking me questions that I don't want to answer, but then I had to. But when I remember going to meet with her when I was working on the draft of the manuscript, and she told me that she had been speaking to another friend about how little they knew about my marriage or my life before them. And she said, "I don't even know what your ex-husband did for work." And I said, "Why would you know that?" Instead of just answering the question. But honestly, why? You know, like why do we need to talk about that? Because I do, you know, I am so lucky to be friends with so many of the best journalists working today, you know, present company included. Okay, very good. And I'm very, like, I'm not a journalist myself, but I feel very influenced by a lot of the ethical decisions that come into reporting on other people's lives. And so even more so than this book being very much about, you know, the shame and the shadow that at-fault divorce has had over the way we understand it today. I also really, really wanted this to be a book about the feeling and not the details, because the details do matter to me, you know, and to the people I love. But this is, you know, this is a book that's going to live forever and is supposed to enter other people's lives and be, I guess, maybe like a way for them to understand their own experiences, hopefully, if I should be so lucky. So yeah, I mean, I guess that's my classically elusive answer.
I've learned with Haley over the years that to find out how she's really doing, you have to ask her 3 times. How did you actually write this book? Once Twitter Reach assigned this to you,
Yes.
what were your rituals? What did you indulge in? And because I know you, what did you abstain from?
Oh, yeah. Yes, Jazmine knows I'm very punishing. Actually, one of my favorite moments early in writing the book came from you when you were asking me this exact same question just over dinner. And I started telling you all about, you know, I use Scrivener for everything. I like it very much for organizing my research. I have all these systems for my notes and my books and whatever. And so I'm telling you about how I'm planning on getting through the outline that I set for myself in a year. You know, I'm gonna finish this manuscript in a year. And you just looked at me and said, okay, now that I've spoken to Haley, the project manager, can I speak to Haley, the writer? So I love the project manager answer, obviously. But as a writer, I approached it by doing a lot of reading. That is the way I think. And
actually, I want you to expound on that. I think that's a very central way to understanding you and this book. What do you mean that when you read, you think?
Okay, so I think, wow, now that I'm actually trying to put it into words, what do I mean by that? No, it's just there's something about giving your full concentration to anything that to me automatically lends itself to a thought that actually makes its way out of just like the haze of whatever is going on up here, and into something that's sort of lucid, that is either something that helps me understand something or becomes the type of thought that I want to share. And I do find that the more of other people's words that I'm taking in, whether that's in a book or in conversation or a movie, the more words I'm capable of coming up with. So it's, I think what I want to say is that when I say that when I'm reading, I'm thinking. It's that when I'm reading, I'm responding. You know, I'm taking it as like the invitation that a book or any piece of writing or piece of art actually is, and that, you know, there's that famous Simone Weil quote about how like attention is the purest form of grace, and that's what it feels like when it hits.
Are we okay on time? Fab, okay. Ooh.
Last one, make it count.
Wow. Since I have known you, I've always thought of you as one of my most romantic friends. We have a true romantic friendship. What is romance meaning, looking like, sounding like, tasting like to you these days? Yeah, bitch.
I mean, this is so romantic right now, what's happening.
We got ready together in her hotel room, we held hands, I love her.
I mean, like, this is so corny, so forgive me, but being in a position to be with my friends and to talk about how much they mean to me right now, this is a great opportunity for that, and that feels very romantic. I do think, like, right now especially, I guess it's the season for it, but I think it's very romantic to rest and to be like very careful in the literal sense, like full of care for yourself and for the people that you love.
And then one more secret question. Haley, before, she's had so many lives, but Haley was a makeup artist. She writes about this a little bit in the book. What should we all buy?
Okay, I will admit I'm out of date because I feel like very alienated by a lot of the like TikTok beauty stuff. Although I will say I feel like the techniques for beauty are the best they've ever been. Like, actually watch the makeup influencers on TikTok and YouTube. They are light years ahead of what I was studying at George Brown College in Toronto. But I will say I've always found that NARS eyeshadow palettes have a very rich pigment. I hope that's still true. I haven't bought one in a long time. I also, this is so embarrassing, it's so cliched, but like really the most important thing is skincare. Like that is what matters so much more than the makeup, I know. Oh, and
okay,
also,
Sophie Pavitt.
Also, the Armani lipsticks are really good.
Oh, that's good. That's good to know.
Okay.
Thank you.
I'm sure I'm gonna think of a million more after this.
And then you come up and ask us all later. We're gonna go to audience questions now. We're gonna do something fun. If you have a question, raise your hand, and I'm gonna go over to you, like Oprah very early on in her career before she got famous. So, I'll start with you.
Hi. My question is about relocating back to Canada. I think I've seen so many people after they divorce, they move, right? They move out of their apartments, they move to different countries, or they do that eat, pray, love thing where figuring out themselves. And after you had established such an amazing career in the US, like the dream of every Canadian writer, you decided to leave before all of this crap going on right now. Everyone is asking me, like, when will I move back to Canada? And I was curious about your thoughts about that and how you, how did that, because I'm sure you got asked a lot about it in your life, in divorce life, but also in terms of how that shaped your writing career right now. When you could, you had so many opportunities, but you preceded all of this implosion stuff going on right now.
Yes.
How did you know Donald Trump was going to be president again?
Oh my God, what did I know and when? No, it was like both much more practical and then a lot more emotional than anything, like not very deliberate. It felt very natural because, I'm not from here. I'm Canadian, as we've established. We've made that my personality. And so I was on a visa that was expiring, and it's quite expensive to get a new one. I was working for a company that was based in Montreal. I'd always wanted to live in Montreal. And I think I also felt, that was like, I guess like well into the first year of the pandemic. And so things were moving virtually anyways, or had been for a long time. So I think I sort of hoped that those New York years would just carry me on, because of course it's the relationships with editors and publications that matter most. And then also I had to finish this book, and what better place to do that than Montreal winter? Hi.
I'm curious, how long after the divorce did you start writing about it?
I started writing pretty much immediately, but like I was describing, I did not know I was writing about my divorce. I was just sort of collecting thoughts and notes to myself for no reason that I could really think of, which is also different for me. I'm not somebody who keeps a diary. I never have, because I'm so afraid someone will read it. Like when I have something to say, I'll write it in a way that it can't be published, which is again why there are no secrets in any of my writing. And so once I realized that this was something that I was writing and that I wanted to write, it took a lot of time in the research and cultural analysis part of it before I could even begin to touch the personal stuff. But of course, that's what all the notes had been about. So it was really like starting in one place, going a million other places, and then ending right back up where we started. Sure.
Okay, hopefully it won't follow.
Don't.
I have to stand up because
Oh.
I'm like in a little hole. But I want to try to make like a comment that leads into the question so it makes
Yes.
sense. But as like a 50-ish old woman, very much in the generation of the shame of divorce and stick through it and for the kids and really the system successfully squashed any kind of intuition. And so when those feelings that would come, we would, stuff them away. And so I think that reading these books, and I put them in the classification of marriage, divorce, strong woman, you hear my voice, all of that. They ultimately, I can't know for sure, but they ultimately gave me the permission to get a divorce, and I'm a year and a half into what is actually a very, very hellacious situation. But it was like reading them gave me the courage to do it, and some of it was because of just desire, and even to see all the suffering, it was like I'd rather suffer. Like I'm almost like long for their suffering instead of the hell of what we were living. And it seems like there is like a divorce genre of books almost right now, and like I have this like badass women, like I consider you all, I haven't read yours yet, but I'm sure that I'll love it. And I put them all in like, they're like my team. They don't even know they're on my team, but I love these women, and I'm so, so grateful for what they've given me in the future, my future. And as you can see, I'm really emotional. I'm a little bit nervous.
Me too. No,
Congratulations.
Yes, let's applaud divorce.
Thank God for these books.
Yeah.
I mean, really. And, I have teenage girls, and I just am seeing these young women here, and I'm just so hopeful that we won't have this same shit in all the years that, whatever, no regrets, all that bullshit. But I'm grateful for you and for everyone else. And my question ultimately is, do you feel like you're a part of something? Do you feel like, because even I feel like I'm a part of some wave, some motion, some like, where I want to find those people and be like, we're fucking doing this, like that shit. So do you feel like you're part of some community?
Wow. Well, first of all, I'm so sorry to hear about your divorce, and congratulations. And I love that this is a room where we applaud a divorce, because it is, it's a celebration of sorts. And I loved hearing about your experience, and I'm so grateful that you wanted to come here and share that with me and all of us. Because yes, absolutely, I made some comments in the book, and I make a lot of jokes about it, but solidarity with all the divorcees, like it really is a type of community that comes out of any status that is so built on these very complex feelings of, sadness and rage and perhaps happiness and relief. And then also, like you say, this inheritance of so much that we don't feel, but perhaps have the sense that we should. And especially, the reason that the books and movies and other art pieces that I write about in the book are so present is because I'm really moved by the way so many of them are reflections of what was happening at that period of time, but then also shaped the people who were in the audience or who were the readers of it. And so if there is a formal community, like, yes, I want us all to apply to be a part of it, But hopefully it just means that there are more opportunities for people to find their people. I think there were some people who wanted in the front. Hi.
I wanted to ask, I'm so glad that like the romance part of this book and you as a person came up, and I'm wondering how you think your thinking in this book and just as a writer has influenced your work as an organizer.
For everyone who can't see, Jazmine is wearing great question. Thank you so much. I love that question. Yes, like I was alluding to earlier, I definitely put a lot of my feelings about separating into an organizing drive for when I was at MTV News with many of the people who were part of that organizing and bargaining committee here. Because organizing is a great place to put some unprocessed rage, you know, like it's a fair fight. It's how I feel about it. But that's also a huge part of where so many of those friendships came from. And so I definitely had the sense of it being very intertwined in my life. At the same time, this divorcee identity was also becoming part of my life. And that was a huge influence on the book because I think I was so attuned to the sense of labor and class that are so present in all the most brilliant writing about the family. You know, I'm thinking, of course, about like the classics like Silvia Federici, and then more recent authors like Melinda Cooper, who write with a very specifically like political lens. But even if you read the more, I guess, like objective is the term, like Stephanie Kuntz, they're also very politically minded because there is no other way to look at these little units of people taking care of themselves as anything but political.
Did you have any sort of rules that you, after you got divorced, like, I'm not gonna talk to him ever again, or like, forget it, or were you just like basic, like how did you decide any rules or?
I don't think I did, but if I did, I definitely didn't keep them. And I think that's the only way to do it. Like, absolutely, boundaries are so important, and rules can provide very good guidelines. And like Jazmine was saying, I love to be very like disciplined, if only so that I can like be mad at myself when I break a rule. But I think like the real answer is whatever rules exist, they have to be treated with some grace. Because, you know, once you've gotten out of a marriage, this is not the time to just put yourself into another commitment that doesn't serve you.
Ooh, bars of fun. Do we have anyone else? Yes. Hello, young man.
Hello. I feel like we hear people talk a lot about the differences between like getting married and just being in a long-term relationship. People be like, oh, I don't need the government to know that I'm in love or whatever. But I feel like you don't hear people talk about the difference between a divorce and a breakup. So I was wondering if you had two relationships that were the exact same length and you lived together and all those things, like what do you do with the distinction between a divorce and a breakup?
In many ways, that's what the book is about.
Yeah, I mean, well, I think the very unromantic answer is the stuff. That's really what it comes down to. I was speaking to somebody today who is also, you know, a young divorcee, solidarity forever. And we were asking each other about what we're up to, and she mentioned that she's been with her partner for many, many years, but they're not married, but that they own a house, and that's much more intense. You know, like she's done marriage and she's done co-owning a piece of property, and this is the real commitment. And so in any form of breakup, if you have pooled significant resources, separating them is going to be just as difficult as a divorce. So that's like the not fun financial answer, but it is the very literal one. The emotional answer is that I think there is something about people who are in committed relationships that haven't gotten married, where I don't know if maybe they're, you know, in circles where this is the case, or if they're doing it to themselves, but I often hear them reporting that they don't get the same gravity given to their loss that a married couple would get. And that is true. And sometimes it works the opposite way, where you have maybe married couples who are like, yeah, it didn't work out, better luck next time, but people are treating the end of their relationship as though it's this great, great tragedy. So I think perhaps like the categories have these assumptions that maybe influence how we ourselves see what we're going through.
One more. Yes. Ooh.
Hello.
Hi.
I have a question of what was the most frustrating question you received after you got divorced? Whether it's from someone random or a family or friend. And if something doesn't stick out, then what was the best question or comment you received? What is like a moment that stood out to you?
Okay, actually, the thing that comes to mind is not exactly an answer to this, but it's my favorite story, and it does appear in the book, so I'll give it away for free, which is that soon after I separated, I met a very sweet friend of a friend at a party, and we were just making small talk, and he goes, "Oh, I met your ex-husband recently," and I just, I don't say anything, and he, to perhaps fill the silence, goes, "He's so nice," and and I said, "Yes, that's why I married him," and then I left to get a drink. And I think he's very embarrassed about that now, but I genuinely think of it as one of the funniest things that happened to me. I'm just like honored to carry that memory with me and to have it in the book.
Okay, we're all set? All right, I'm gonna sneak in one last question, sorry. Haley, when we had Divorce Club, I had also just gone through a big breakup, and you gave me permission to identify as divorced. What did divorce give you permission to do?
I guess write this book.
And that's it. That is a great place to end. Thank you, Haley. Thank you, everyone, for coming. This is the first of a bunch of book events that Haley is doing in New York. She's got a whole Divorced Women series at Metrograph happening. Go to the movies. Maybe you'll break up. Have fun. Thank you for coming.
Yeah, bring a date, buy tickets. Thank you so much.
Thank you all for coming. Before we get moving, I just want to let y'all know what's going to be happening now. First, we're going to just ask you all, please make sure you gather your personal belongings when you leave so we can start to break down and rearrange the space. Please be very mindful of all of the art around you. Haley will be signing books. That's going to be happening right up at the table where you checked in. If you don't have your book yet, don't worry. You can get in line. We'll be selling books right next to where she's signing, so you can buy your book while you wait. That's all. Thank you all so much. Let's give these two a nice round of applause.